right, so we're at 5 minutes after, so we're going to get started. So this is the first of what will hopefully be almost a weekly series of presentations about different topics. So today the topic is about game engines, and presenting we have Darius, who is a game engineer programmer in his second semester at Clark. He is joining us from the Becker School of Design and Technology. And he's going to present a game engine that he's worked on, Xerxes. And he began work on that in April of 2020. And so he's very passionate about game development in general, but in particular about game engines. And he hopes to continue working in that area after graduating. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hi everybody, my name is Darius. I want to thank everyone for coming to my presentation today. So in my presentation, we're going to do a little bit of overview over a bit of my background, my experience at Becker College, and what it was like being a Becker student. Then we'll go over the importance of portfolios. That will be a great segue into my Xerxes game engine demo. After that, we'll be talking about how Clark students can get involved with Becker School of Design and Technology. I think I have a little title there. And then we'll talk about the gaming industry as a whole, diversity, equity, and what's the word for that? Inclusion, sorry, yeah, inclusion. That's where we'll include clubs such as Women in Games and IGDA, Independent Game Developer Association. And we'll be talking about those clubs related events. Okay, so I am in my second semester sophomore year. I'm a Becker transfer. I'm going for my major in game programming. I'm on the board for Women in Games. And as for my professional background, I was involved in 3 programming internships during high school, namely Wilcox Industries, Optics One, and Clearline. They have no association with game development for the most part. They're just defense firms in the New England area. But thank you, Dad, for the amazing connections. That's me with my favorite dog in the whole world, Mila. We are practically not separable. Okay. So my Becker experience. I joined Becker in the fall of 2020. That was my first semester, and then on the spring semester of 2021 is when Becker unfortunately closed down. This was during, at least the fall of 2020 was kind of during the heart of the pandemic, I'd say. And so everything was virtual then. Come spring, there was a nice development where we were able to get onto campus. However, all classes were still virtual, so there was some semblance of a on-campus college life, but really the most social events a lot of the time for the first part of the semester was when the fire alarm went off. And we just all stood out in the cold. But yeah, so for me, the whole transfer process wasn't really anything new. Clark is now the 3rd college that I'm attending. We'll go over more, but I first originated from Wentworth, then I went to Becker, then I went to here. But I know that for a lot of other Becker students, they were pretty heavily affected by the transfer, especially those that were on schedule to graduate. Some of them now need to take an extra semester. But I think all in all, these things work out for us. Okay, so enter my time at Becker. One of the reasons that compelled me to join Becker was when I was at Wentworth, I was going for a degree in computer science. Prior to that, I was mainly self-taught. My original thought process was that it would be an easy A. Turns out it was actually a bit of a challenge to stay motivated doing work that you already know. At least for me it was. So I ultimately found that it would be in my best interest to switch majors to game programming. Something still in the realm of computer science, but more aligned with my particular interests. And it's honestly the best choice I've ever made in my life. Never going back. It's perfect for me. That's also where I really picked up on the importance of self-driven learning. College is an excellent place to learn and make connections, but I've been always told by many members of my family that education is what you make out of it. There is some inherent value to it by itself, but if you don't really apply yourself and utilize the connections you have, you're not going to get as far as you typically, you would otherwise. And that's a great segue into, oh, did I go the wrong way? No, I didn't go the wrong way. Okay, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, so, yeah, kind of talked about this a little bit, but I guess one of the big challenges for me personally, first with Becker, was that when everything was virtual, it was difficult to make connections since everything was virtual. I also, maybe some other people will relate to me when you're big into gaming, usually a big aspect of that is multiplayer gaming. You make friends online. The virtual environment in a new school, it's like, no offense to anyone else, but I wasn't really in the business of making new online friends because I already had enough. I wouldn't be able to keep up with more. So that proved to be a challenge. So my first semester at Becker, I was able to interact with professors, but as for meeting students, wasn't too involved with that. It got better the next semester. I at least was able to talk to my roommate on a regular basis. Another great thing about Becker was that it had very big emphasis on the agile mindset. Now, the agile mindset is basically just being able to adapt and work over various challenges, be able to change your game plan, if you will, in the face of obstacles. And to help with this, there was many opportunities at Becker to become Scrum certified. Many of the courses at Becker were followed under a kind of Scrum structure. So one of the classes in particular was Game Studio. And in Game Studio, at the start of every Game Studio, we would have what was called stand-up. Everyone gets up, it was virtual, so everyone stood up and talked about what they did since the last meeting and what we're going to do today and up to the next meeting. And the whole of the Becker major for game programming, game development as a whole really, was a project-oriented learning. And now that feeds in perfectly to what I want to talk next, which is an emphasis on portfolios. I think there's a lot of majors where you can get by just a degree, just from a personal opinion of mine. Like math, when you get a degree in math, you can go to a lot of places. Computer science, the same deal. But I think with a lot of creative majors, you can do that as well, but what really helps is having a good portfolio. It shows personal skill beyond just GPA. So you can do well on all your classes, but maybe you know the theory pretty well, but you don't really have anything to show that you put into good practice. And when you have a good portfolio, it really stands out when you're looking for a job because it will give employers confidence that you actually are capable of your abilities. So now it's demo time. Oh, that's not what I want. Oh, this one. Okay, so this is a game that's running on my game engine. I call it Monkey Dungeon. Title's at the top of the window, but it's not on that little area where it would be. Not yet, at least. This was a game I was working on. I started working on it during my last spring semester at Becker, and I've been working on it extensively over the summer. I recently stopped working on it to do more improvements on the game engine, but let's check it out. So all the animations I did, all the assets I did, the game engine is capable of doing simple 2D animations. And this is actually a UI I made in the engine that's not using the UI framework yet. So we'll be going over a demo that's involving the UI framework, but the need to make a UI framework stemmed from this game. Because if I maximize the screen here, it doesn't look the best. It looks like it's just kind of like keeping the resolution down, but that's actually just, the game camera view is actually expanding out and you're just seeing the void, stuff that's supposed to be covered up around the menu. So that's what the UI framework addresses, but this is not currently using that. So we can go ahead and begin. Okay, so this game has some cartoony humor to it. The goal of the game here is we have 4 monkeys, and we will have enemies on the other side of this bridge that we're traversing. And ideally, the end goal of this game is to be multiplayer. And it's supposed to be a fast-paced party game. So everyone has turns. You have a maximum party of 4 players, each one controlling a monkey. And your turns are timed. So you can't just sit idle and think your turn out. If you don't do anything, you'll just skip your turn. So it's supposed to be fast-paced, and everyone's working together to defeat the enemies that approach down the bridge. And the game kind of loops on that way forever. There'll be some other interesting encounters that you could with the dungeon, but as the most part, that's basically the gist of the game. Now, every monkey has these classes. We can see with the little Robin Hood hat, this monkey here is an archer, this monkey here is a warrior, this monkey with a little golden halo is a cleric, this monkey is a wizard. So right now we're starting on the warrior right now, and so we can go ahead and just punch there we go. So we can go ahead and punch the goblins. And yeah, so there's a bit of a cartoony humor to the ability names. So all the monkeys start with the 2 basic abilities of punch and poopy flame. Everyone gets a kick out of that. I really enjoy it. So later on in the game, you're able to replace these abilities with new ones. And every monkey has a 3rd ability that's unique to the class, like banana ring. Throw a banana. And we just keep going. Oh, my apologies. I thought I removed the graphic depth animation for this presentation, but it appears I did not. My apologies if that bothers anybody. That's honestly, I was hoping that. Okay. Anyway, we can keep going. Poopy flame, throw some poop, and you just pass on. And it kind of continues like this as the game progresses. So that's pretty much Monkey Dungeon right there. And that's just some kind of output from the game. So now let's look at the UI. This will be more pleasant. Okay, and now another interesting thing is that this is Monkey Dungeon was using a very old version of the game engine. The newer version of the game engine that has a UI framework also has a very fancy logger in the background that you can see. It's what's called verbose mode, which is basically spitting out a very excess amount of information, just in case you run into any problems with your game. You can kind of backtrack through the log and figure out exactly what went wrong. So I'm going to just run this again because while I was talking, it was going over a little bit of helpful information. So welcome to the Xerxes Game Engine UI demo, and then it'll tell us to press space to begin. So if I press space, it's going to open up a calculator. And now if I click all the buttons, it will work as expected. So we have 555 times 336, and you can do math, but that's correct. Make sure it's correct. A benefit of the UI framework compared to Monkey Dungeon is if I maximize the screen, everything scales. It scales whatever the window size changes. So the graph here. It's always using the same percentage of the screen as it initially did. So that's the game engine right there. Let's go back. Okay, so the inspiration. So you can read it for yourself. There's some information there, but I'm going to just quickly talk about a little story I had where at some point in my life, I mean, growing up, I always loved ancient history. And in history class, we talked about ancient Persia and the conquests they had into Greece, ancient Greece. And that's when I found out that there was a game that had the same name as me. And so growing up, I thought that was very interesting. And later on, you know, later in my life, I kind of just had this moment where it's like, you know, if I had a kid, would it be cool if I named them Xerxes? Like, would they like that, or would they resent me? And I think that's kind of like a 50-50 coin flip. They'll either be a big fan of it, or they're like, Dad, you are so self-centered and vain. And it's like, you know what, I'm not going to take a risk. I'm just going to name my game engine Xerxes, because my game engine can't complain. One thing that I really liked was, I have this quote here, where Xerxes is making their speech as they go to invade Greece, trying to pick up after his father's legacy of trying to invade Greece. And Xerxes says, "We shall extend the Persian territory as far as God's heaven reaches. The sun will then shine on no land beyond our borders." What I thought was really cool, as Professor Story brought up with me later on, is like, maybe you should reconsider naming your game engine Xerxes, because after Xerxes ruled, as the sort of decline of ancient Persia, as his conquests don't work out, I was like, you know what? I like the whole name idea, and I never thought of it that far. But so the goals of the engine is mainly just as a learning project for me. There's a lot of engines out there, a lot of engines better than mine right now. Because, for example, my game engine can't do any multiplayer, can't do any audio. And it's probably not as robust yet as some of the game engines out there. But again, it's just mainly to be a learning project. So like learning OpenGL, when I first started learning how to do all this, my understanding was OpenGL was just a library you use. Actually, more specifically what it is that it's a technical specification made by the Kronos group. And so from my understanding, there's various implementations of OpenGL on the terms of the hardware end. So basically, a lot of video cards are trying to interface under the specifications of OpenGL. That's how it kind of works as being cross-platform and you can work on multiple video cards. I'm particularly using OpenTK, which is a C# wrapper library for OpenGL. If you use OpenGL, you're going to be working in C++. I just really like C#, so I stuck with OpenTK. Another big challenge was just people to manage and document a large-scale project. So I'm constantly using Git. If I didn't use Git, I think I would have pulled all my hair out by now. It's a big lifesaver, very important tool. For those who are not familiar with Git, Git's basically a tool that helps you manage and keep track of versions of your code. So as you continue working on it, you can keep specific snapshot versions of your code, and you'll implement this new feature that completely breaks everything and would be a huge hassle trying to get it back in working order. So what you can just do is say, you know what, I'm going to abandon this version entirely and go back to a previous version and continue working from there. Project is saved. And documenting this project that it's large is very important, otherwise you'll get completely lost and you'll be working with code that you've written over. In my case, I actually have come back to code at this point that I had written over a year ago on my engine and touched up on. So there have been moments where I was very grateful to my prior self of keeping some documentation like that. I was like, what does this thing do? But as for the design goals of the engine, beyond just learning goals, is I want it to be a very robust engine, one that's very difficult to use incorrectly. So as much as you can try to break it, the goal is as much as you can try to break it, it's still going to find a way to kind of run if you want it to. And you can also set it, if we have time at the end, I can go over how this whole thing works. But if they can run into errors, but it can still keep going because it's set up to kind of handle them. You can also make it so that no, if you run into error, I want you to crash because I don't want things to try to keep going. So it's meant to just kind of keep going. Yes?
So your game engine is written in C#.
Yep.
So when someone writes the game using your engine, what do they use?
C Sharp.
Oh,
As in, yeah, C Sharp. Also, it's to serve as an alternative to popular game engines that require a paid license. So it's not, I was told that like, oh, you shouldn't make your own game engine, you should just use one that already exists, which don't worry, I have taken the time to learn ones that already exist. Doing that honestly just helps me develop it. Like keep developing this engine, figure out, you know, Unity did it this particular way, I like that. Unreal did it this way, I like that better. So I can pick and choose and add to my game engine. But if you want to make a game that you want to sell, you're going to have to pay royalties to Unity and Unreal Engine. So if you want to avoid that, you have to make your own game engine. So the goal of this is when I go to finish it, which I have every intention to, I'll have it online and anyone can just use it for free. You make games on it, if your game makes $1 million, you don't own it anymore. Okay, so now enough of myself and my game engine. Let's talk about Becker School of Design and Technology and how students at Clark can get involved with that. So for myself as a Becker student, we were always told, you know, it's kind of a joke, but like you can flunk all your classes, just make sure you attend the game jams. Now, don't fail your classes, of course. But what they meant by that is that just to stress the importance of what game jams meant for you in your career as a game developer. What happens at a game jam is a 2 to 3 day event. It's similar to a hackathon, if anyone's familiar with that. If you're not, don't worry. But the difference between a hackathon is that it's without the competition. So what you do is you work in a group to basically build a game that in a lot of time period. And it's basically just a workshop for your portfolio. Once you finish the game jam, you'll have something to show at the end, and you can add that to your portfolio. It's great. It's an extracurricular activity that helps you get a job in the end. I think there's no reason not to attend one. So that's one thing Clark students can do to get involved with these programs from Becker. Joining the WIG and IGDA Discord, we'll be talking about those clubs later on in the presentation. There is a QR code right up here. I'll also have it on the presentation at the end. You can scan it and join the server. I highly recommend it for anyone interested. And also, just don't be afraid of working on something big. Even though you may choose to work alone on it, like myself on my game engine, you don't have to learn alone. So I constantly talk to friends of mine from Becker about my game engine now and then. But the big part is when I get really stuck, I'm not afraid to ask for help. I'm also on the OpenTK official Discord server, and it's really inspiring sometimes to go on it and see showcases of what people did. There are some people that have done some very impressive stuff. It's great. So now let's talk about the industry and its movement. So two popular game engines that we talk about at Becker is Unity and Unreal. Unity uses C#. It used to support JavaScript and Boo. Don't feel bad if you don't know what Boo is. I think they stopped supporting Boo in 2013 or something like that. Old weird language. They recently dropped support for JavaScript, so now they're just pretty much only supporting C#. Unity has always been on C++. These are the game engines we build for Becker all the time. In Game Studio, we primarily use Unity. There's other game engines to mention. Godot, GameMaker, LibGDX is one that I have experience with working before. It uses Java and it runs primarily for Android. And there's also Python, which, as you may guess, runs in Python. Some things that I find really interesting about the industry that I've noticed recently is I would read articles how Microsoft is beginning to write Windows updates not in C++ anymore. They're doing it in Rust. And so what Rust is intended to do, Rust is intended to replace C++ eventually, if you can imagine that. The whole idea is, you know, C++ gives you a lot of performance at the cost of security. Because you're running your code so close to the actual hardware that you want to have speed, so you're not kind of checking your code, you know, null pointer exceptions, you're not checking, like you might have some memory leakage. So you can run into these problems, but the design goal for us is to give you code security and performance at the same time. And so it's very interesting how they did that. Basically, from my understanding, they take on from functional programming a bit, where you can't really cause side effects. And now, for those of you not familiar, side effects is basically when you're in your code, you can call a method, you can call a certain point of your code that's only supposed to work in a particular area, and it's changing values in memory in a different location, outside of its own area that's supposed to work in. That's where a lot of the issues can arise. So Rust is meant to resolve the issue of the trade-off between high performance and security. Kotlin is another interesting emerging language that I've had some experience with. It runs on the Java virtual machine, and I think from my understanding, it's kind of a more modern take on Java. One of the game engines that utilizes Kotlin I found, which looks pretty impressive, is CoreGE. I haven't really looked into it too much, but it looks very promising. And there's also 5 stars. And now how I know about 5 stars, my sister worked at 5 stars, and she had exposure to Kotlin then. So if any of you are not familiar, 5 stars basically, they're a company that makes kiosks that you would tap your card on, touch on the touchscreen to make a purchase at a restaurant. So they use Kotlin for a lot of stuff. They're pretty cool. Another thing that comes to mind with Java is Minecraft, of course, where most of the popular games one can think of. Was originally written in Java, but there is now a Bedrock edition after Microsoft took ownership of Minecraft, where they're basically trying to rewrite the entire game in C++. Just to, yeah, so,
Do you know how the performance or other attributes differ between these two versions?
What I can tell is that Minecraft, Mojang, studio working on Minecraft, is trying to make a very ambitious game update right now called the Caves and Mountain update. And they were originally going to release the entire update as a whole. However, they only released half of the update. And they said the reason why is that they're facing limitations with Java. And they're facing limitations in terms of performance. So their update is so massive and ambitious, so like the world itself is the amount of blocks you can have. It spans in vast directions, but you don't have all that loaded at once. In the game, you can have, if you wanted to like load a particular part of the world, it loads it from the bottom to the top of that small section. And they're trying to double that. And in doubling it, they're running into some significant performance issues. So, I believe, from my understanding, on the Bedrock edition, they actually have a good portion of that update kind of ready, and they were demoing it. But on the Java edition, it's lagging behind. So that I know. So to take from all of this in the industry's movement, a lot of languages of interest is C#, C++ for the, as I mentioned, popular game engines. And honestly, I really dream of the day where Rust takes over C++ personally. You know, I appreciate and respect C++, but I don't know. C# is the first language I really learned a lot from, and I kind of think of myself as being spoiled after that. Okay, so now let's talk about the dark side of the industry. There is, as awesome as game development is, and I like to think of it kind of just like, you know, your wild fantasies coming true in the form of a video game to explore and share with others, it's super neat. That doesn't always reflect in workplaces, unfortunately. It's like, recently there's been a lot of allegations on big AAA companies about, you know, hostile work environment. environments. There was the Activision Blizzard lawsuit recently, where it's just very concerning as to what's going on. A lot of women just in their companies being treated very poorly. And so there's extensive investigations going on, and things don't really look good. Riot Games, so for anyone who's not familiar, Blizzard Games came up with World of Warcraft, a very popular game, MMO. Friends of mine have played World of Warcraft extensively, a lot, have even told me, I think I'm going to stop playing this game now, just after hearing the allegations. A lot of people still, just straight up stop playing the game. And my friend's concerned is I think my game's actually going to die, and I have to play another game now. And they're pretty upset because they got very good at World of Warcraft. Riot Games, they created League of Legends. This is a game that I played a lot personally. Not only did they have certain allegations placed against them on hostile work environments, their gaming community, just competitive gaming communities in that matter, can get quite toxic, where people will, because you can't see the other person on the other side of the computer screen, some people think that they can get away with saying these pretty grievous things, and makes for, it kind of ruins the experience for other people. League has since made certain measures to help cope with that and make it a little bit better for the game community. I've seen it happen. A friend of mine, so one of the things that the League of Legends did was to deal with troublesome players, is they had this thing called, I don't remember the exact name of it, but what's called the committee, I think it was called, but the council, where they would pick players from the player base that were told by other players that they were very kind and good players, and they have no grievances on their record. They banned for saying anything against the terms for Riot Games. They haven't ruined games for their good players. They would be invited to join what's called, I think, the council, and they would basically serve as moderators for the game. They would be able to view a game footage of someone that was reported, and they would be able to vote. Yes, this player has not, they don't meet the community guidelines. We don't want people like this on their game. They can all vote on that, and if the council kind of unanimously votes on it, Riot Games will probably take action. And having that basically let players know that there are real consequences to your actions now. You can't just get away with saying these things. And now the community has gone a lot better. One of my friends was on the council for an extended period of time. They were able to tell me, the community's gone a lot better than this. So there's definitely steps taken to help this. But it's important that we have exposure on these issues, because sometimes they still keep happening. I want to talk about the right side of the industry before we go into Becker clubs. One of the things I was talking to another board member at Women in Games is this one company called Mightier. They're based in Boston. And what they kind of do is they develop games for children to cope with emotional challenges. And on their website, you can see after 12 weeks, there's significant improvement. One of the statistics was that after 12 weeks, children are reported to have there's over a 60% decrease in emotional outbursts. Kids are able to calm themselves down after playing games on a Mighty platform. And one thing that was really touching for me personally was when the board member told me, so they have these bi-weekly events called Mightier Moments, where parents and kids will talk back to the company and say, hey, this is how your platform has affected me directly and how it's improved our lives, and I think it's really good. So, now let's talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. One thing that, because of these hostile work environments, I think it only adds emphasis to the importance of the Becker Club Women in Games. So what we do in Women in Games is we host events to gather industry professionals to speak with students. So ideally we try to get females in the gaming profession to come over here and speak to the students. They can talk about their experiences, what it was like getting to their job, what it's like being in their job, and what it's like to be a woman in their position and work through that. And so it's very helpful and inspiring. There's speaker events, mocks interviews, and portfolio reviews. I was able to attend a portfolio review last semester, and I made excellent connections. One thing that's also important to take note of is that events that are held in women games are not exclusive to just women. Anyone can join. It's just the whole spirit of the event is to help promote women in game development. Then there's IGDA, Independent Game Developer Association. The biggest thing that I always get on IGDA is the game jams that they host. Recently, this past weekend was a game jam. This upcoming Halloween on October will be the Halloween game jam. It's the most popular game jam, and definitely looking to redirect a lot of attention here at Clark towards that. So with WIG and IGDA, some of the connections that we have together as these two sister organizations, here's a list. We've got Rockstar, they made GTA, Red Dead Redemption 2, Sony Santa Monica. My understanding that studio in particular is working on the new God of War game. Mightier, as we mentioned earlier. Deep End Games created BioShock. We have the Warner Brother Games. We have Mass Digi, which is an organization that we worked extensively with Becker in the past. ZeniMax they worked on Elder Scrolls Online. Unity, game engines. There are Becker alumni that are working at Unity right now. Something particularly interesting to myself because they are working on a game engine. Demiurge is a contracting game studio that one of the Becker professors now works at. 2K Games and Snoozy Kazoo. Snoozy Kazoo is a successful studio made by Becker students. And I say they're successful because they are working with a publisher. So if you're a studio and you work with a publisher, you're considered successful because then you're making real games that are getting sold. Okay, and here's a calendar of the upcoming Becker School Design and Technology events. Meet Mass Digi, speaker event to determine who speaks. Sketch Sesh, Halloween Jam, and then there's a speaker event with Robbie Williams, a Becker alumni. Great guy. Didn't get to meet with them in person, unfortunately, but I hope so on that day. And demo day. Okay. Any questions?
At that state, I had a question. First, congratulate you on not just understanding the technical bits, but also being on top of the industry, where it's going. So, and that's not something at least in the environment that I was in prior to my parents that I've seen it too. So, congratulations.
Thank you. It's helpful when you're like just joining communities like the OpenTK official Discord is really exposed me to what's going on in the industry. I'm talking to people that are working on the actual library, and they're saying like, oh yeah, we implemented this feature because NVIDIA or AMD So it's very interesting. You should talk with the people that are working on these cutting edge technologies directly. But I'm sorry, I said
So my question, it's been a lifetime ago that I was very heavily involved in gaming stuff. We're talking sprite-based animation and page flipping on the whole 2D sphere and 2D class. Could you just sort of outline what constitutes a gaming engine? So in operating systems, there are certain set of runtime services we'll expect will be the components of an operating system. And the reason why I asked that about game engines is trying to identify opportunities where both on the research side and the classroom side, we can kind of further stitch in together, Becker with research design.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely what constitutes towards a game engine is, there's a lot of parts to a game that are pretty standard and universal across games. So one of the things in particular is just taking 3D object or 2D object and rendering it out onto the computer display. That there's a lot of code happening on the back end. That's particularly the job of the graphics library. But the graphics library is designed to be pretty versatile. It's just a whole library of just code for you to utilize in terms of getting all that into the graphics card and onto the screen. It doesn't really have things kind of set up and ready to go necessarily. So, for example, if you didn't have a game engine, it wouldn't necessarily load this three-dimensional mesh that describes the shape of an object. What's the kind of visual look of it, the texture, how it reflects light. The game engine kind of takes that from a file, loads it in, and basically was able to parse out all that information and give it to the graphics library. The graphics library can't necessarily do that right out the bat. Another thing is, writing controls for, say, controls, for the keyboard or the mouse or the game controller. There's many opportunities in the game where you can control a character using just a mouse and a keyboard, but you can do the exact same thing on a controller. Now, you don't want to basically write code to handle just those two cases, because you can look it up online where people will say, I finished the Dark Souls game using a Guitar Hero guitar controller, which is pretty intense, but it's possible because they're just able to remap the functionality of that character to the input. So handling input like that is pretty standard across the board, and that's something a game engine would provide. So in essence, the game engine provides these functionalities that are commonplace in most video games. Sometimes game engines will specifically cater to certain genres of video games. Like there's some game engines that say, like, oh, we only do 2D video games. Like my game engine currently only does 2D. It's capable of doing 3D, but not enough. Unity is capable of doing both 2D and 3D. Unreal as well. Unity kind of serves, like an example of Unity is that it kind of serves as a great game engine for hobbyists and those learning about the game development process. Unreal works with C++, so a lot of games written on the Unreal Engine tend to be ones that are capable of drawing on, like demanding a lot of performance out of computers. While Unity is meant to be more smaller scale games. Although Unity's definitely capable of some big impressive games. But yeah, that's kind of the essence of the game engine for sure. Any other questions?
Yeah, so just to sort of follow up on that, would you say, so a lot of games, there's some kind of serious physical simulation going on, right? Things fall down because of gravity and so on and so forth. Is that kind of stuff part of the game engine, or is it somewhere else?
Yep. So that would be the physics engine of the game. It's a little sub-engine of the engine. A lot of engines do come with that. Unity has a physics engine. Unreal has a physics engine. My game engine will eventually have a physics engine. I was trying to implement one prior to knowing linear algebra, and that was a bit of a challenge. I actually kind of got far with it, but I just know that the code that I wrote would not scale well. It works with just a few objects, but say if you want to expand that to like 1,000 objects that are constantly colliding, which is very commonplace in a lot of video games, what I wrote would not work. So that's one of the big challenges I'm actually going to face, I'm going to face again, is writing my own physics engine. So yes, the physics engine is quite a freak of nature. And a lot of video games come with that chip, so developers don't have to write their own. Except me. Yeah.
So, sorry, I'll shift gears here a little bit. I was on a committee with some of the other Becker faculty over the summer. And so I learned a little bit about sort of how the game design program at Becker works. And in particular, I was fascinated by this idea of these project courses.
Okay.
And so, so I learned a little bit about that from the faculty, but I haven't ever talked to any students about it. So I wonder if you could give us sort of your perspective about these project courses and whether you think they're a really valuable experience or a kind of valuable experience and just sort of what kind of experience they are.
So I think one of the most valuable things in terms of project activity you can do is definitely one of the game jams. I just want to get that out of the way. It's like you would always hear at Becker, it's like ask what can I do to exceed in my career? You'd be told attend the game jam, attend the game jam, attend the game jam. So that's always important. But as for the actual courses themselves, we are required to take Game Studio every semester pretty much. And now Game Studio is basically, it's similar to a game jam in a sense, except that it's on a larger scale, a larger timeline, and it's more of, it's basically like a graded game studio put over a longer period of time. Now, those are definitely important because they are taking the skills that you learn in your other classes and applying them the right way. It's basically like the lab portion of a physics class, if you will. So those are definitely important. There's various types of game studios that, and they're all of them are under the basically the watch of a faculty member. So typically we would have someone that's a student act as producer, and they would manage the team. But while all this is going on, the faculty members keeping tabs on everything and watching everything, making sure that people are kind of putting the work in. So that's always very important. And I know some individuals are on what's called a green light studio, which is basically the same as Game Studio, except the goal of the Game Studio is actually to finish and upload a game made in the studio to Steam. Right? It's just as an actual official game. So there's varying degrees of what goes on Game Studio, and students are typically selected based on their experience, from my understanding. So newer year students will be grouped up into the studio, while seniors are grouped up into another studio. Thanks. Any other questions?
So do they formally teach agile Scrum methods, or is it, sort of as you're executing on game design, these techniques are projected into the classroom?
So a lot of game studios will definitely use Scrum software, it's like Jira, Trello board. There are classes offered at Becker specifically for those in the production major, and those classes are oftentimes, they teach you what you need to know to become Scrum certified. After the class, it's always recommended that you go ahead and go through an official Scrum certification. And it's always a great, if you're a producer in game development, you're not going to get too far if you're not Scrum certified. It's a pretty important thing to have. Oh, it looks like we have 6 minutes left, but if we have, is there anything, there's something going on at 1:30, right? I'm not sure. Because if we have a bit of time, I could go over a more technical demo with the game engine and look at the code and kind of see how things operate if anyone's interested.
Is there someone else?
Darius. So, two of you mind if I interject this one?
Go ahead.
So, two of you asked about how the studios and stuff work in background with, and I have students as well. I'm a senior this year, I'll computer science major as well. And the studios are a very great opportunity for us to kind of collaborate and learn how it's working in actual studio environment that's run and has specific deadlines, specific things that we have to accomplish each week. So the game jams are great and everything, but a game jam is more of like a bunch of students get together and say, let's make something. It lasts the weekend, sometimes something comes out of it, sometimes it's just a good way to flex the muscles, that is. But the studios, because there's deadlines, there's projects, there's goals you have to meet and everything, we have every 2 weeks we have to turn what's called sprint. So with the sprint, it's, you do a write-up of like either what you've learned to get yourself ready on the research you've done, or what you actually worked on before the game jam. Most of the projects will either be in Unity for C# or Unreal for C++. And then you have everybody collaborating, so artists, sound production, management, like he's talking about, and programming with us. So it's a great opportunity for the students to actually get down, learn about how to work with this stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, so we can now go over. Okay, so now let's look at some code.
Also, everyone should know there's food up here.
Oh yeah, please help yourselves. There's also, I forgot to mention, there is a QR code at the front here. Anyone, I think I said this earlier, but there's a QR code at the front here. Anyone interested in joining the Discord server for Waiver IG and IGDA. So if you're interested in getting involved with game involvement, I highly recommend you join the Discord server. So, let's go here. Yeah. I set my Vim up to basically be pretty similar to an IDE, and it has autocomplete, linting, pretty nice. So, one of the, when you make a project on Xerxes, right? You always, like here, we can, thus far I've been always making it as a console application. And then here, basically in the main map, we are creating a new window that we define. We'll go and like look and see what the display window is, and we just run it. So the display window here inherits from this class here in the game. This is one of the new nice features that I recently mentioned, is just passing in game arguments. Now, game arguments, I can show you it later, but basically it just takes on a lot of information that's used for setting up the game. So like one thing here is I'm modifying to the game arguments. I want it to be verbose, and I'm making it, the logger for Xerxes just writes to a standard text writer in C#, which basically is it's basically like a standard out. So I'm basically, normally it would just write to console. So if I delete this here, whoops, I could delete this here. If I did, I'll show you later, but if I did, it would just write to a normal console. This console logger here is what had that nice fancy output when I was running the UI demo earlier. So, here, when in the game engine, right? So you'll make this class here that's the game. It's kind of just your program in a sense. Here we're able to do other things. Like here we're just loading in some assets, like the Xerxes icon, which you'll be able to see in a moment, as well as a font. And over here in the constructor, we're just creating a new scene. So there's some services that are offered by the game. So if we could see, yeah. So you have a scene management service that basically lets you switch between scenes. Now, what a scene is basically a very specific part of the game. So like you'll have a main menu scene where you first start up the game, you see all these buttons, you'll click and you'll say, I want to create a new game. You create a new game, it's going to now enter a new scene called the game scene, and that's where the actual game takes place. There could be multiple game scenes, and you could represent each level in a game as a game scene. So this game scene management service in Xerxes lets you switch between those scenes and keep track of them. We have a text displayer, and I'm eventually going to replace that and get rid of that. It's kind of old and obsolete, but it's just responsible for writing text to the game window. Sprite library, keep track of all your sprites. These are variables just to keep track of the render time thread and update time thread. So the render thread is basically just in charge of drawing things to the actual buffer and swapping the buffers. Update time is basically all your game logic. We have an input system, another big part of game engines that I mentioned earlier. I'm actually pretty happy with my input system. I think I did a pretty nice job. We'll go over it a little bit. It still needs some improvement. Very happy with my logging system that I added that recently. Asset provider, this thing is basically what you utilize for getting everything into the game. An event scheduler, this is just to keep track of all the events that can go on in the game. So like, primarily right now what I'm using it for is controlling UI, kind of like when I had that UI demo and all the text was sliding in and sliding down, those are all controlled events. And so that's where all these events are scheduled here in the event scheduler. This animation schematic library is in the works, not actually being used for anything. Animations doesn't even utilize this right now. But so that's some of the features of the actual game class in the game engine. So here I'm making a new scene called testing, and I'm giving it a name testing. This returns what's called a scene handle, and now you can have, you could if you wanted to add multiple scenes under the alias of test scene, and it would do that. It would actually give you, it would write an information message in the console, so it's like slightly more important than proposed, and it'll tell you, hey, you are adding a scene that's using an already existing name. I'm going to use that name, but append an underscore and some number. The number is the number of times you're reusing this word. So this basically, because the scene management service utilizes a dictionary, doing it this way where it returns a scene handle makes it so that you're always getting something that's valid. You're always getting a valid feedback. So that just kind of, so when you try to set a scene with a screen handle, it's never going to check if the key exists because it's you can't construct the scene handle if you wanted to. It's constructor's internal. So it's never going to check if it's a valid key because it knows it's a valid key and created it. So let's go ahead and look at, right. Let's go ahead and look at the test scene. So here I'm adding what's our scene layers. And so the scene layers basically, you can have multiple UI layers, and an example of that is when you're in a game, you have like a user interface so you can see how much health you have, your resources, the abilities you can use. That's one layer. But then if you wanted to press escape and open up the main menu, that would be another layer. And so you can swap between like enabling layers and disabling layers. And so you can have as many layers as you want. Layer system needs a bit of work, but basically we can see here I'm adding a new test scene layer, and I'm enabling it. So now let's check out the test scene layer. So now this is where things get a bit interesting. When the test scene layer is created, I'm creating a new UI game object called Sphinx. And I have some methods down below that I'm just hitting them. I'm going to show them later. This one right here is just creating a basic Sphinx, and we'll be able to see what that is in a moment. Then I'm adding it into my game engine, or I'm adding it into my scene layer specifically. And I'm using this thing called a UI anchor. And this has various positions that we can utilize. So if we look here, we have middle, middle left, middle right, top left, top right, top middle, bottom left, bottom right, top middle, versus middle. So what this is going to do is that it's going to put this right in the middle of the screen. And so, and here we have an update, an override for an update, protected update bucket right here. This is where we're going to do some of our game logic. But for now, let's just go ahead and check this out. Okay. Looks like I'm gonna build it. Do some Linux stuff. Make it so that I can actually execute the executable as created. Oh, whoops. I did it again. Okay. So we run this, and we have this Sphinx that's in the middle of the screen. And here we have all this logger output. So if we actually take a quick look at this, so here it's basically loading all the systems, and then you actually have the option to add your own custom systems in if you wanted to. I'm not utilizing any custom systems. In essence, it's kind of a bit of over-engineering, but I thought it was neat. It's something I added early on. Here we're loading all the systems. Another thing with the logger is that you can specify what object the log message is originating from. This is great for keeping track of where all the messages come from, the flow of the program. Here we're loading some shaders, and here we're loading some content. So let's go ahead and hop back in. And let's make a Sphinx that can talk. So, I forgot to mention. If I run this again, it should have it that if I click the Sphinx, it will say, oh, that's right. That's okay. Okay. Well, here we'll have a talking Sphinx. Private, create chat Sphinx. So, like this. Right here. Build it. Now when I click it, oh, here we go. This is part of the demo now working. Oh, right. I know why. We need to actually be checking for input. That's one thing I forgot to do. So we need to be checking for input. So I wrote this helper function here that's down below. And then we're going to also let's just actually take a look at the helper functions at this point. So here's all the helper functions down below. Right. We're handling the input. We need to register. Yeah, here we go. Visualize it. Okay, so now this should work. There we go. So we click it, it says hello, let me go away. So we had to just basically, what I was missing is this right here, we look at this. It's basically saying, right, register an input pulse for a mouse button left click. And so what an input pulse is when you're checking for input, it will kind of tell you, if you're holding down the left mouse button, it's going to basically, if you're not using it as a pulse, it's going to constantly run a certain segment of code so long as that mouse button is held down. But what we want is that, regardless if the player holds it down or just clicks it once, we don't want this code to run once in response to this input. So that's what we use an input pulse for. So we're just registering an input pulse using the left mouse button. Now, over here, we're constantly we're basically, on a UI scene will not constantly check for a input on each frame. You have to manually specify that. This is just in case you're using a UI frame, you're using a UI there that doesn't actually utilize any input, then you don't want to be doing additional operations you're not going to utilize.
I have to head out for my class, but
All right.
when you're done, can you just close all that stuff and log out?
Yeah, sure.
Well, yeah, thanks so much for speaking today.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. Let's see everyone soon.
Nobody feel like you're a hostage. You gotta go. Before you go. I'm just gonna keep talking all the time. I still got. But yeah, so because we are carrying out input, we're utilizing this function over here. That's basically calling a protected function, a protected method of the UI scene layer. And the UI scene layer is basically saying, all right, just check to see if the left mouse button is clicked. If so, fire all the events that care about the left mouse button being clicked. So now let's go ahead and do something exciting. Let's make these Sphinx move left and right. So to do that, we're going to get, we're going to keep the Sphinx there, but we're going to get something called the UI glide container. We're going to use our helper function over here, create glide container. And then what a glide container is, so in my UI framework, there's containers. Anyone familiar with like Windows Forms is what I got all my UI experience from. UI Forms. It's basically just like a panel. The container in my engine is just a panel. And so glide containers specifically, there's various containers available to us in our engine. So we check it out. This is a UI container, it's an abstract class. And the implementations for that you can find in UI. Okay, yeah, implemented UI containers. Whoops. And then we have a strict container, bound container, and a vague container. So a strict container is basically any container. You can utilize a strict container. It's not abstract. You can, a lot of our scene layers are by default using a strict container. What a strict container is saying, like any element you add, any UI element you add to me must fit inside of me, or otherwise I'm not including it. I'm not adding it. I'm not registering it as something being fit me. Every UI element cannot overlap each other. I will sort them such that they will not overlap each other. And in the sorting process, if they fall outside of my bounds, I'm not going to add it. An unbound container basically is similar, but it says that if it doesn't fit my bounds, that's okay. It's still considered within me, it's just outside of my bounds. So this is great if you want to like say something like, I want something off of the screen, but I want it to slide in and slide out. Then you would utilize something like an unbound container. Now, a vague container is super relaxed. A vague container does not care if the UI element fits inside of it, and it doesn't care if it overlaps with another element. It can do anything. Very laid back. Now, if we look at the gliding elements, here we have the UI glide container. Now, the UI glide container is a specific container that has extra functionality for just, making your life a little easier, just having things glide between certain nodes. So a UI glide container only accepts one type of UI element called a UI glide node. And UI glide node has nothing special to it. All it is basically a position that you're setting, and it's in the container. And then when you add a non-UI glide node element to the glide container, you specify a range of indices of glide nodes, and it will basically go between